This is our group, some of the pictures from some of our trips, but otherwise we're going to jump into it. So, um, I'm going to quickly show you
Michael, I
guys.
don't know. I don't know if it's just me, but I'm like
Yeah,
your screen's flashing and we're not seeing the slides in the presentation mode.
It's glitching. It's not presenting.
Yeah.
okay.
Do you need me to share?
I don't know. Maybe, but I mean, we're just going to talk through this anyway. I think the
Well, stop
important thing
sharing it
is,
because it's very distractive.
all
It's
right.
like strobe lighting. There we go.
I wonder if it's because it's on my second screen. But anyway, we do have the do's and don'ts of interviewing laid out. So, far as trying to take a bunch of notes and stuff through this, we will share at the end and summarize. So otherwise it's gonna be me and Kevin's beautiful faces on here just having a conversation about them. So all right, Kevin,
Yeah,
here we
so
go. Let's get started.
let's start first with your dues and what we encourage you to do. And again, I just want to encourage you all to please, if you have questions or experience or whatever, chat them in so that this isn't just Michael and I yammering away on it. But we spent some time a couple of weeks ago and put a list of the top 10 things to do, top 10 things to don't. And I'm going to start us off with the first one, and I think it's probably can be the most intimidating for a lot of people. But the trick to hiring, and maybe really it's before we get into the interviewing process, is how do you cast a wide net to get a lot of applicants? And running your organization and finding those applicants and then vetting those applicants, it can be very, very time consuming. So the first do for you is to use technology, and to try to find ways to automate that process for you. It could be as simple as using a special hiring at email address. So you have a Dropbox that you're kind of monitoring. You can set up an auto reply to that candidate. We'll talk a bit about that in a bit as well when we start talking about timelines and stuff. But we use that technology. Michael and I both use an HR software platform. We post our job hiring through that software platform. What that lets us do is to really quickly look at the candidates and then be able to move quickly with the next steps as far as asking them for references or setting up an interview, or using other pieces of technology. So I'll give one example. We have recently had some changes in our office, and so we used that normal HR hiring platform that we've used for every candidate, but we added another wrinkle to it for our office staff for a video interviewing software. And what that let us do is very quickly look at the 60, I think we had 68 applicants over the course of a week. And we were able to just anyone that had phone experience send this video interview to. It adds a bit of a gut check moment, right? Are you gonna open this email? Can you use technology to fill this video out? I mean, if I'm hiring someone in the office, we use 28 pieces of technology every day. It's probably a good measuring tool. So what that let us do is take 68 candidates, narrow it down to 7 people who sent in their video interview, and then scheduled 2 in-person interviews and hired 1 from that. So technology let me cast a very wide net. What's nice is you go back and you look and you see that those interviews people we interviewed after their video interview, I would have probably not looked at looking at their resume. I probably would have passed on them. And so it allows you to, you get less protective of your time when you're like, I'm gonna put the ball in their court and have them do a video interview. So use that technology.
Technology's huge. Were you intentionally not bringing up the software that we use? Seems like
I mean,
they haven't sponsored you yet, so you aren't.
no, I don't have a sponsorship, but we do both
Yeah,
use Bamboo HR.
yeah.
Um,
Bamboo HR is was a game changer for me for sure because it's just since it's not what we do every single day, right? It's not.
mhm,
Uh, but when we do it, we really need to make sure we're doing it well. And Bamboo keeps that structure so that you can keep track of them, see where they are in the process, and filter a much larger number. I know there's some others out there that work very, very similar. I think even Indeed
yeah.
its own software that helps you do
Yeah, Gusto. There's a couple others.
that.
The video interviewing platform that we use is called Willow. It's WILO, I believe. I think it's just one L. Let me double check that for y'all. WILLO.
Yeah.
Willowtalent.com. It works really, really well. Again, I've never used it for the technicians, but we've used it in the office and had great results with it.
Yep. Technology, it's huge. It's helpful. Use it. I think it's Bamboo's a great tool anyway, just for your own HR team. And when you the hiring component to it, to me, it becomes a no-brainer to have it. All right, there's your first do. Moving on to our second do is be involved. And what that's all about for me is, I think it's, as I was saying in the intro, it's the most important thing that we do. And I've seen it too often where companies teams are handing it off to a team member to do, and maybe that makes sense for if you have a good filtering system or software that's managing it, and then, but I just think that it needs to have your fingerprints as the owner, as the leader of your organization, all over it. It's so, Kevin, to your point about filtering out people too early in the process, um, by being involved, I think it's important that you can kind of manage that a little bit tighter. I just don't think there's so much of our business that we do need to delegate to scale and grow. But I think until you really get to a very large organization, being involved in the whole process, I think, is extremely important. It's one thing that I had not let go.
Yeah. I'm probably burying the lead a little bit, showing us a little bit of what one of our other do's is later. But it's important to note that in a smaller organization, a lot of the times the core values of that company are really truly the core values of the owner or owners. And so removing yourself from that interviewing process, you are unintentionally removing the core values portion. Whether you have core values on paper or on a wall, they are who you are. And so if you remove yourself from that process, then you've removed them unintentionally. And so that's why it's important for you to be involved.
All right,
All right,
number.
our third is what I have labeled, or what we label at Innovative Pest Control, working interviews and ride-alongs. And so what is a working interview? A working interview in our case is where we have done the in-person interviews. We've gotten them through, the video interview. If it's an office employee, we've moved them into the office. We've done an in-person interview with them. And then we move into what we call the working interview. And in that particular case, you could think of this as a cultural interview. So if it's an office employee, they will spend at least 20 minutes with every employee in our office, sitting with them and watching them do their job. This idea has been around for a while. I think, Michael, I know you do this with your technicians, and on the technician side, I still think it applies for the office as well. You're really kind of wanting them to know pretty quickly, like, are you, because oftentimes, at least in Michael and I's case, we're not hiring people with experience in our industry. So you're really quickly kind of saying, hey, is this industry good for you? Do you feel like you could do this? For the technicians, but also for the office, right? Like, if you're a person who gets EBGBs every time you hear the word spider, probably not a good fit for our office or the field. And so that's things you kind of want to learn quickly. So we have them set with each employee in our office. Here's the key to this. When we talk about being involved, if you're going to do that, you're going to involve your employees, then have them be involved. So in our case, if we're putting somebody in a working interview, they are part of that interviewing process at that point. So it's independent on how I or how one of the other leaders at our company may feel. We still take the feedback in from the office staff. If they all unanimously think that they wouldn't be a good fit for our company, we won't offer them a job. Even though I may have thought they were a great candidate. And so that's an important part of it, is if you're going to have them do these working interviews, it kind of lets you learn a little bit about them in that role. Obviously, in the field, it's learning what they do and how they do it. I don't know if I see. Okay, perfect. Michael, our insurance agent, is on the call, so we can say this. We both encourage the applicant to drive. the company vehicle. I want to know if that person's going to flip somebody off or cut them off in traffic or drive like a maniac or have road rage. And all of those things matter. And again, the same goes for the technicians. We leave it up to our technicians to say, hey, the most important question we ask is, do you think, would you want to work with that person? Are they a fit here? And Michael has, and can talk a little bit about the very Michael-esque checklist that he has that he asks his current employees to fill out as part of that interview ride along. But don't just think it needs to be a phone interview. Maybe to tie into this, if you guys have read oh, why am I drawing a blank? The Ideal Team Player. If you've read that book, in that book, they talk about kind of the impromptu interview process where they ran an errand. And we're not quite doing that, although I'm not opposed to that. But taking them out of that normal environment, I think you can get a truer sense of the read of that candidate versus, sitting them in a conference room or across from your desk.
Yeah. So we think this is probably one of the most important things that we do in our hiring process is the ride along with the technicians for a candidate for as a technician. And we have, as is referred to sometimes as Michael's ride along list, is a very things to look for. We do not want that list to be out. It's the candidate doesn't know anything about it. The ride along needs to be very just feel like a conversation. And when they do that for a day, they're going to get a lot of that. Your um, person that's doing the ride along is going to get a lot of information from them, and they're going to fall back into who they are. And what they're looking for there is how much time are they spending on their phone? Did they take a bunch of calls? Did they make a bunch of calls? Are they texting all day? Were they engaged? We don't make them work, but if they offer to get out and work and help, and is like, are they just wired to want to like be there and learn and asking a lot of good questions when they're driving? We're just looking for, are they a courteous driver? Are they a more aggressive driver? All of those things, because I mean, how many of us have hired somebody and then realized this person really doesn't drive well. They're not a good driver. They don't have good sense of awareness. And that's probably the most important thing in your organization. That's probably the highest liability risk that you have. And it's is their ability to drive. So I think it's something not to be overlooked. And I think making that part of the interview process is critical. So
And I think you gotta know that element of like that what if they were, we live in towns or typically urban, right? Do they have experience driving whatever fleet vehicle that you have, right? If somebody has driven a small Honda Civic their entire life and you're going to go put them behind the wheel of an F-150, it's a very different driving, how it handled, and it's just a very different process for them to learn. Do they have experience with that, right? And kind of being cognizant and aware of that. One last thing, because I can probably think you all are like, okay, wait a minute, hold on. The candidates we're hiring, they're could be employed or maybe they just recently are unemployed. It's important to note that during these processes, because we have 4 or 5 people in the office, it may take 2 hours, 2.5 hours to interview a candidate. With these working interviews, we pay them for that time. At the end of that interview process, we cut them a check at an hourly rate for that time that they have. And that's how we tell them that in the beginning when we're asking them to please hold a couple of hours of their day. And that's how we can kind of get their buy-in. And if they can't hold a couple hours of their day, then that's kind of what we need to know already anyways. And we're amenable to if they are currently employed and we're trying to, just find a new home, then we'll work around that. But it's important part to notate that.
all right. Group interviews. So group interviews, this is where we're talking about multiple candidates, where we actually are bringing in multiple people that we are looking at hiring and going to interview them together as a group. And the especially the more candidates that you have, it makes a lot more sense. And all of us have been in the situation where you bring them in for interviews and you probably have 25 to 50% of them that are no shows. So if you go ahead and you bring in 4 or 5 of them and half of them don't show up, and now you're interviewing two or three of them, you're not wasting your time. And I'll tell you, it also creates an environment where they realize there's a little bit of competition. And then you also get to see how they operate in a group environment, how they are they courteous to the other candidates? Are they, um, how do they handle those social environments? And one thing about it, we are in the people business, and if you're hiring somebody that doesn't handle social environments very well, as a technician or even as a CSR, that's probably not a good candidate, right? So being able to do that, I think one is a efficient use of your time, but you're also seeing a different side of them that you probably wouldn't have seen if you brought them in and talked to them as an individual. So I know we've done quite a bit of that over the years, and it's always a positive.
We did. We've done one. It was a little bit of an internal sell to get everybody to agree to it. But I would say we've hired one of our best technicians from that group interview, and the other one worked themselves. We actually hired two of the five people that were in that. And I think Michael, to your point, I think we interviewed or invited eight. I think only five showed up. Hired two. And one of those technicians quickly worked themselves out of the company. And I don't know if the panel interview did it, or excuse me, group interview. But I know that, it was the one who is still with the company was by far the number one candidate in the job pool. And so it's still, it does help with that part of it. And I know maybe based off their current performance right now, and the investor stakeholders that are there, Southwest Airlines does this a lot. And one of the things that they've always focused on, is cultural questions in that interview. So the number one uh, trait that Southwest is looking for is empathy, which I think we can relate to, whether you're a technician or whether you're an office employee as well. And so their number one question that they ask in their group interviews is, tell us your most embarrassing story. They actually don't care about the story. They're looking for the physical reaction of the other candidates in the room, because the person who genuinely looks like they're embarrassed for that person has empathy. And that's the candidate they want to hire. So you get that element of where a well placed question, maybe to one candidate, can give you the answers for other candidates. And that's kind of a really big value add that you can take away from a group interview. And yes, Ken, I kind of inadvertently answered your question. We're interviewing them all at the same time. And so you do kind of have to change your questions a little bit. And you kind of got to, I always think about it as, you remember, in I think it's junior high, you always did popcorn, right? Michael might ask the question and say, Michael, tell me a time where you struggled or faced adversity. Michael answers the question, and you kind of have to popcorn it back around and be like, okay, now, Ken, how about you? Can you kind of take it and pivot the question a little bit around, and that way everyone's getting a fair opportunity to talk.
Mhm. And we've done technicians along with CSRs, even they're basically interviewing for different positions as well. So we've mixed and matched and done a number of different ways. But I think seeing them in that social setting and how they feed off of each other, and it's just a really interesting dynamic that you don't get. And I'm telling you, when you put them side by side, I think the cream rises to the top much faster that way too. So
Agreed. You'll notice a trend here, which is that, so far through all of these, it's about protecting your time, because your time as a leader in your company is super important, right? Whether that's using technology or whether it's, you invite one candidate and they no show you, and now you're in the office and whether you wanted to be or not, and you've got this time you've set aside, which may be good, but it's still not doing what you wanted to do, which was to advance the process and hiring someone. So I think those are all helpful of that, or for that. Our fifth one is similar but a little different. It is panel interviewing. And so this is very common in corporate jobs, but I don't think we should shy away from it in our industry, even if you have a smaller group. A panel interview just means that you have more than one person from your company interviewing. It could be one candidate, it could be multiple. In that case, to me, that's more of a group interview. But a panel interview in this case would be one candidate, multiple representatives of your company in the room asking questions. I think a couple of things to note there: don't get too many. This shouldn't feel like a firing squad. Physical position of where you put yourself and your employees matters. Don't put everybody on one side of the table where it does feel like a firing squad. And then split up your questions so that we're not asking the same questions twice. The same employee or different employee for your company asking the same question twice. So it does take a little bit of planning, but we do this almost every interview that we do when we do the in-person interview is multiple employees. Part of that is recognizing, and I might also be talking about one of the don'ts. I'm a horrible interviewer because I want to talk about the company and why you should come work for us. And so I'm the salesman. So that means it's best to have another person in the interview with me to make sure that we're asking hard hitting questions. Or that maybe hard hitting sounds a little harsh, valid questions to truly vet out an employee.
Yeah, and there's a good don't in there too that we need to make sure we'll touch on when we get there, as part of it is making sure that we're giving them time to talk, right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes we're all fighting for our opportunity to ask the questions. Um, yeah, Tammy, I think Ken's question about are we interviewing them all at once? Yes, we are. We are interviewing a group of candidates all at one time, all in the same room, and certainly having the panel of your own team members as part of that is important so that you have multiple eyeballs seeing the different reactions too. So combining the panel interview with the group interview is an important component. But as
Yep.
Kevin said, it's an efficient use of time. You're looking at multiple candidates together at the same time, and you're getting more information faster that way, and makes the process more efficient. And you're getting data that you would not have otherwise had just because of the social interaction, as Kevin was saying. So, okay. Moving on to the focus on culture and core values. So I am putting our core values and purpose in the application process. When they fill out an interview or submit their resume, Bamboo allows us to ask those 4 questions, or as many questions, I think. I'm sure there's a limit, but I ask 4 questions personally. And my first question that I ask is, of these core values, which one do you like the most, or do you find is most important to you? And I give them, like, we have 7 core values, but I think I give them like 4 or 5 options, like be a pro, celebrate failure, everyone matters. And what I'm doing there is I'm seeding in our culture into the process. And I was going back and looking at some resumes, Kevin, uh, to prep for this, and seeing how many candidates answer that versus non-answer. In fact, one that I looked at, they basically said NA, like not applicable to him. He's not willing to answer it. Okay, am I going to kick him out? I don't know. Depends on the rest of the resume, but it's certainly something I'm going to bring up for sure. In the like, hey, why do you think that this does not apply to you? Um, and so what it does is it gives us a starting point to have the conversation as part of our interviewing process. Is like, hey, you filled out this. You said the celebrate failure was is resonated with you, and you said it resonated with you because X, Y, and Z. Tell me more about that, right? So we're starting to have conversations about our core values on the first interview and even prior to that. So I think it's just a huge way to let them know that you're different, who you are, how do you operate as a company.
I think that so we don't require it as part of the application process, but it is in our conference room. They are all on our wall. We ask the question very actually stole it as McFarland says. We call it R&D, rip off and duplicate. So I ripped off and duplicated the question of which of our core values stands out to you and why. And that's part of our interview process. And it's one kind of I'm looking for body language, quite frankly, more than the answer. What I'm looking for is somebody who kind of brushes it off like this is the stupid exercise. If it's a stupid exercise to them, then you find who the company itself is stupid. Is the way we kind of look at that and take it into perspective. And getting to Michael's point, I might not disqualify a candidate for it, but it weighs in 100%, into that particular process.
Yep. Um, all right. I love that one. So don't um I hope you guys have your core values and you make it part of your process. All right. Torque. So this one is from Top Grading. Dr. Brad Smart has a book called Top Grading. His son has a book called Why, and it's another good book about hiring. But TORC stands for Threat of Reference Check. And it is probably one of the most important questions that I asked during an interview, which is, um, hey, it looked like here in your resume that you reported that you worked at such and such. Who did you report to? Who did you work for? Like, okay, so you worked for John. Great. How long did you work for John? Okay. All right. So in those 4 years that you worked for John, when I have a conversation, when I call John up for as part of our reference check, because to be hired on here at Safe Haven, you need to have at least one reference check, really two reference checks. So when I call John and you set that call up for me, what is John going to tell me about your strengths? Okay, great. And then tell me about what is John going to tell me about what some of your weaknesses are. So when you present that question that way, that, hey, in my conversation with your former employer, what are they going to tell me? It gets to a much more honest answer that you're ever going to get. And then you need to be talking to John anyway, and we will hit that reference. But that threat of reference check question asked during the interview is like critical. I'm not going to do an interview without it.
It's a great point. The next one, and I think this is technically, well, let's pause real quick. I think we got another question.
Ken was saying, I think I said the book was Why. Ken,
Thank you, Ken, for
was
keeping him in
waiting for me
line.
to make a mistake here, and it's actually Who. So thank you, Ken. I appreciate your honesty here and keeping
Yeah,
us
someone's got to keep you in check.
yeah.
But so the next, why don't you go ahead and talk about the next do, Michael, before I give my comment, because I think it
Okay.
fits. And yes, Sean, that is exactly right. That is a core value of Safe Haven, which is celebrate failure. So good job, Michael.
It's good to have people that hold you accountable, Kevin, you know.
That's right.
So all right, our number 8 do is always call references. It shocks me. I mean, it truly shocks me how many people on this webinar here that I know have made hires without calling a single reference. I'm not calling you out, Jason. I wouldn't do that. Wouldn't call anybody else out on that. But I have heard that it happens. So do not hire anybody that doesn't have that's not willing to give you a reference. And here's the thing, guys. I know that the mantra that's said over and over is, oh, people will they say yes, they were formerly employed here. Here's the thing. I know you guys have probably been called, maybe you should, from previous employees that are giving you as a reference. And if you had a good employee, like Ken, you and I, we've had this conversation. Like if you that person was a good employee, you want to tell that new potential employer how great they were. If they weren't, maybe you're not willing to share as much. And that what is said and what is not said is important, but don't make a hire without calling.
Right, 100%. So the comment I was going to make, which ties into the reference check and to, calling in the references, is I think technically, legally, you're only allowed on a reference call to ask if the person rehireable, yes or no. But the nice thing about this threat of reference check that Michael talked about earlier is well, you kind of can grease the skids a little bit when you have that call to do the reference check. If Michael's the former employer or current employee, the reference that I'm calling, hey, Michael, I'm calling about Jason, in a reference. We've already asked him these questions. He said these 3 things that he was good at and these 3 things that he needed to improve on that you would have said. Wanted to check in and see if you had anything to add to that. Well, they're probably going to start talking a little bit more than, yeah, they're rehireable, or no, he's sugarcoating that and he's way worse or way better of an employee than that. So I definitely think, and I don't know, Michael, if you would agree with that, but I would imagine that if you could bring some of that contextualized part of that conversation from the employee or the candidate, bring that to that reference check, I think you're probably going to have a more productive reference call too. which is great.
Yeah, and I think a part that I'm really leaving off, an important component actually is I don't just get like their reference name and a reference number and then I do it. The way that I approach this, I said, "Hey, candidate, will you call John, your previous employer, and schedule a time for me to talk to him? Or tell me when he's available to talk." So they actually make the contact, which then opens up the conversation that much more, right? And if that person, there are situations where they probably they're currently employed, and maybe they're not ready to do that or whatever, right? So I get that. There are scenarios that can be sensitive, but for the most part, most of our hires, they make the call, which then opens up the conversation and they feel much more comfortable because they're giving personal, like, please, when can Michael call you, or when are you available to take the call? That changes that reference
So
conversation.
three things are occurring by doing that. Number one, similar to the video interviewing that I mentioned earlier, you have put a barrier to entry in there that's strategic. Are they going to do it? If they do it, then great.
Yes.
And if they don't do it, you've got an answer. The second thing that comes in this is you've validated the quality of the reference. Is it a real reference? I don't know what I just did. Happy celebration, everybody.
With
Um,
celebrating.
and then the third thing that's important is you once again have protected your time. You could go back and forth with that reference on phone tag, or you can call them Tuesday at 9 a.m. because that's what the candidate said they're available for you to talk. And so again, it's created a little bit more efficient use of your time as well, which is a really important part of that. All right, next we have be intentional, efficient, quick, and concise. Uh, the thing to always remember in most of these roles that we have, one, I'm very proud of our industry and what we pay our employees, and no matter what your employee role is, that we have an incredible industry. But a lot of these people do live paycheck to paycheck, and so don't drag this out. I think it's probably some of the best advice I got when I first joined Innovative. As I was asked by Tony and Kelly to rebuild our hiring process. They had implemented Bamboo, pseudo implemented Bamboo. I needed to finalize all of that and move a lot of that onboarding process and the paperwork and the legality side of hiring an employee inside of Bamboo just to streamline everything. And so I built this entire process and pretty quickly was told by some good friends, hey, look, you have a 5-step interviewing process and that's never going to fly. So be quick, but be concise. Don't come off of the things that matter to you the most, right? Talk about those core values, do those reference checks, but you got to move quickly with it. And be efficient with their time so that you don't lose a quality candidate. But don't rush yourself either. I know Michael said he wouldn't call out people who didn't call references. I'll throw myself under the bus. We made some pretty bad hiring decisions, and by we I mean me. Well, I'll take all of the blame. I made some bad hiring decisions, and a lot of these don'ts that we're going to talk about in a minute are personal wounds that I am still licking from this summer. And when we in our office specifically, and one of the things we did is we hired family, a brother sister combination. One of them I called references on, and we didn't the other because they work for the same pest control company. So it's a lot of red flags. We can talk about that later when we get to the don'ts. But I didn't. I moved quickly, too quickly, came off of our process, and it bit me in the butt. So don't go too fast and modify, but also don't drag this out because candidates need you to move in an official and communicate with them, right? It's a personal goal of ours for every candidate that we hire. Again, technology helps us with that. We reply to every application, even if we've disqualified them from the interviewing process. I've got a template built in Bamboo, and so it's easy to execute that way. But we just feel it's important to be intentional and to update them in the process, where we're at, where we're moving along, if we're interviewing other candidates, and whether they're still in contention. So I think that's important to be intentional, to be efficient, to be quick and concise when you're going through that interviewing process. And lastly, for our dues, and not lastly by design, it's an important one, is use referrals. They are the number one source of applicants for us at Innovative. And most importantly, do not be cheap with your referral. So there are lots of companies out there that have really high dollar amounts, but be intentional with it and be intentional with how the trigger that you are, right? Like one of the things that we do that I'm championing to change for us now is we pay a referral. It's a decent referral. I think it's $250 upon the hiring, and another 250 if the employee, if our to our current employee, if the employee has been here for over a year, the new hire. Well, why is my current employee responsible for the retention of that employee? I would rather pay the $500 to get a better quality candidate in the beginning, upon hire, as an example. So that's one example of where I think we could improve our referral process, and to get those. But I will tell you that some of our best employees today came from referrals from other employees, and so it's an important tool to use. But you got to ask. Don't put it in your employee handbook and then leave it. Every time that we post a job, we communicate to our office, to our employees in the field, and we say, hey, we have this opening. It is posted online. Here's the link. Um, if you have a candidate that you have asked to reply, email me so I know that you're referring them. And then I prioritize calling those candidates first.
Yep. I think $500 is probably a minimum that you want to give as a referral. And I've heard as much as up to like $2,500. I think
Hmm.
probably 1,000 probably tends to be what I hear is a fairly common, and it
Same.
goes both ways. One, $1,000 to your current team member that gave the referral, and I do think that like $500 upon hiring, and then maybe $500 at 90 days or something is. But I don't think I would carry it out much longer. But
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
I've heard of a lot of complicated like numbers and figures and matrices to divvy that money out. I always go with simple is better. But then don't be afraid either to have like a signing bonus either. I think that
Yeah.
that's a good thing to have. And so even if you're spending $1,000 to your current team member and $1,000 to the new hire as a signing bonus, spending $2,000 for a good hire is a drop in the bucket for a long-term good quality team member. So don't
Yeah.
be cheap.
Yeah. And I think there's other ways that you could monetarily, I think, Michael, I think you guys do this at Safe Haven, and we started doing it with you after you had mentioned it. But when we hire technicians that we tend to hire without experience, we put them through an online training course. We actually pay the employee to do that outside of their normal onboarding hours with the company. So we say, hey, this is going to take you probably about 3 to 4 days cumulatively, over a period of time. If you'll do that after hours and at home, we will pay you for those hours if you complete it within the first 2 weeks. Because what we've seen is you start doing your onboard, your on-job training hours, and then you get to the end of this, and the employee is ready, but they haven't completed the coursework portion because it's you haven't set them down in front of a computer or whatever it may be. And so we just took that ball and put it into their court and compensated them for it, and that's worked really well for to expedite the onboarding process for unexperienced hiring for the technicians.
All right, we got 20 minutes to cover the don'ts. So we have been do heavy here, but let's keep rolling to our don'ts. All right.
Okay, the first one,
That
don't
one, this
panic
one's
hire.
yours. Panic
Yeah,
hire.
don't panic hire. And what I mean by panic hire is you needed the person, you need them tomorrow. They have some form of experience, maybe, and you start to see these easier path to success, if you will, and you panic hire them. So I mentioned earlier we hired two candidates. We hired people with industry experience. Software similar, the same software that we use. I only checked references on one of them. It was a complete and utter panic hire, and it damn near tore the office apart throughout the course of the summer. I moved away from our culture. I moved away from our process. I moved away from all the things we've talked about in the dues, and it was a mistake. So don't panic hire. You're better off to just find a way to gut through the pain of whatever you may need temporarily.
Agree. I don't. All right, number two. This one, I know this one's hard for you, Kevin, and it was a hard one for me to finally learn too. Shut up. Don't sell yourself or the company. The reason why you interview is to listen to the candidate and hear what they have to say. Every time you're talking, asking an incredible question, selling your company, whatever it is, you are wasting valuable time and not letting them talk. So shut up, ask the question and shut up. And silence tends to bring out more information. It's use the same processes in an interview that you would in a sale, right? When you're doing sales, you want to give just enough information to make the sale and then shut up. And then we need to learn to do that in an interview. I think once I learned from Dolphin about how he interviews, I realized how much I was talking and selling. So I'll give Dolphin plenty of credit on this one. Him teaching me, like, ask the question and sit back, and then you'd be amazed at how much additional information comes when silence occurs.
Yeah, I tend to bite the inside of my lip, so I force myself to shut up because it's just natural that I want to talk. So it's an important part of it. And I think the one thing that when made this mistake as well, when I pivoted and made the change, the other fruitful thing is when you get to the end of the interview question, you ask question, what questions do you have for us? And you want to open the floor. There's nothing. If there's no questions, it's because you talk too much. Once I stopped talking and let them talk more, and we got to the end and we asked that question, then they started having questions. And I think that this is our natural industry chip on our shoulder. You know, we want to talk more. We want to try to sell the job because we're worried that they're not going to want to come work in the pest control industry, especially if they don't have experience. But don't worry about that yet. Just vet the candidate, right? And go through that.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
our third don't overthink the resume. We're typically hiring people who may not have a lot of resume experience or haven't put a lot of time into the resume. And so just don't look at it and be too critical of them for the resume. But don't, and that's where the technology comes in. Like I said earlier, we basically look if it's an office employee in that example I gave. Do they have phone experience? Because that's the soft skills that we would rather see. We're going to teach them the software. We'll teach them the industry. But it's difficult to teach someone sounding good on the phone, right? And so that's an important thing. But you can cast a wider net that way versus like, oh, this person doesn't have any customer service experience. Who cares? As long as they talked on the phone, right? And that's an important thing. Don't overthink it.
Yep. Yep. You want a good technician or a good CSR. You don't want somebody that's just really good at creating resumes. Um, but I think I don't think we touch on it anywhere else in here. Well, actually, we do on the next one. So don't hire job hoppers. I think that is probably the most important information in a resume, is looking at their past experience. And if they move around, they have a job for a year and a half, 2 years, and they've done that for the last 5, 6 years, you're probably not going to be any different. They just tend to be somebody that, for whatever reason, they either get bored or the company gets, finally figures out who they are and lets them go. So that is probably the most important information that I glean from a resume, is looking for their loyalty or their job hopping tendencies.
The geography matters, right? And that's one of the things, kind of goes back to the hiring. We were guilty of this. You'd see someone apply for a job and, you know, being in Tyler, Texas, it would still say Dallas, Texas on the application or on the resume, and we would disqualify them like, well, they don't live here. Well, remember, we're in Texas, everybody moves a lot. Maybe they just moved to the area. And so that also could be a reason why their loyalty may come into question. Maybe it's military, and they're relocated recently out of the military, whatever it may be. Keep that in mind as well too.
Mm-hmm.
Next
All
is
right.
don't limit yourself to experience. In my opinion, I would rather hire somebody without experience. It just, you can again cast a wider net that way. And we make it very vocal in our application process. Like, we'll teach you the industry. Don't worry, experience not required. But you got to have an onboarding process. We'll talk about that. So it does create a little bit more work for you, but I think you can create a candidate or create an employee out of a candidate that you want to create versus somebody who's coming in with experiences that you don't want in your company. And that's an important part of it.
Yeah, I think this goes back to our original do, which is cast a wide net, using technology to do that. And to me, if you're limiting yourself to people with pest control experience, you've just cast such a narrow net. I like to see people with customer service experience. I love to see either somebody in the hospitality industry or food service. I tell you, people that have been in the food service business, their schedules tend to be kind of crazy and evenings and weekends. And if you can show them, hey, you can work, more of a normal Monday through Friday, at least for us, 8 to 5, and earn as much, if not more, income. Like there's a lot of people that will line up for that one, right? Um,
Yep.
and some of them are even willing to take a pay cut just to have normal hours, but most likely you're probably going to be paying them very comparable wage, if not better. So yeah, don't limit it to experience. All right, the verbal offer, don't do them. Don't give verbal offers. It needs to be black and white. It needs to be concrete. It needs to say their compensation needs to be well defined on there, what your PTO is, all of the things that they're hiring up, that they're signing on board for, needs to be listed there, so that a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month, a year down the road, there's not a question about what their compensation plan is. It needs to be very complete, in black and white, with your signature, with their signature. Don't leave things to chance on here. This is starting off on a firm foundation.
This is where that techno hiring HR software comes in really handy, right? Because we formally send an offer to there, they formally accept it electronically. On that note, just I know this is about hiring, but this verbal offer, this goes for current employees. If you have moved a current employee into a new role, you need an updated comp plan. Get it in writing. Don't do that verbally either. Okay. Next, don't hire without an onboarding plan. This is oh, I gotta think for a minute and make sure I say it right. Going back to my eighth grade shop class, measure twice, cut once, right? This is what this is. So if you're gonna go do this formal hiring process and you're going to set the stage for this candidate, then day one matters. What are you doing on day one so that they're impressed on day one? And then every day they're on, and have a formal onboarding plan. It's going to take time. Sit down, right? Pencil it out. And it could be literally just a piece of paper that you say, first 3 days you do X, next 3 days you do Y. And I'll tell you what, we're really good at this with technicians because the state requires us to. There's an onboarding plan. I know what I got to do with these guys or gals to get into the field. It's the office. We typically don't have this. And so it's important to have that onboarding plan, and then communicate that and then hold that employee and your employees accountable to executing that onboarding plan.
Yep. And I hear all kinds of wide variations on what companies, the expectation of how long it takes to get a technician out in the field. And ours is really about a 6 week process, and it's very identified, all the subject matters that need to be touched on. Kevin, to your point, like you can use TPCA's online training. We ask them to do that on their own time on the weekends, and we or evenings, and we pay them once they've completed it. And so that way it's not really getting in the way of our 6 week onboarding for them to get into a truck, right? And
Yeah.
become a valuable member of our team. And I'll and let me actually onboarding. Let's look at real quick day one. When we bring them on board, and this doesn't matter if this is a technician or CSR, whatever, we usually are going to bring that member in on a Tuesday morning, preferably. It's not going to be a Monday. We have brought people in on other days of the week just to make it work. But day one at Safe Haven is going to be a memorable experience for them. We're going to bring them in at 9 o'clock in the morning, so that we've already kind of gotten past the chaos of 8 to 9. We're ready to spend time with them. We're going to celebrate them. Sean usually goes out into the parking lot and greets them as they arrive, brings them to the building. We're all, celebrating and clapping and making noise and welcoming them to the team. Then he's going to share some information about the company. We're going to send them through a scavenger hunt where they learn about the company, how to get in the building, how to unlock the gate, how to, what, all the goofy things from restrooms to
Door code.
glues to their phone, to their business cards, to their uniform. Like we have all of that ready to go. Like how welcome do you think that they feel when they walk in the building and they got uniforms ready to go, they got a phone ready to go, they have their business cards ready to go, all of the things for them to be a professional, you're giving them on day one. They're not an afterthought. They're something that you've been excited for to bring them on board. You're making them feel welcome, and that's has been very very successful for us. Then they're going to go meet with the CSRs in the building and have a 5-10 minute conversation about what they like, who the things that food that they like, the restaurant they like to go to, the snacks, all those sort of things. And then we're going to sit them down and I'm going to give them the history of the company. I'm third generation. My great uncle started the business in 1955. I'm going to tell them all of the history of how we got to where we are today. And then um, we're going to take them to lunch and we're going to have a nice lunch and get to know them at a deeper level. And then we're going to go find something fun to do. We've done everything from go-karts to top golf to going to the museums, going to the George W. Bush Museum, whatever it is that you have available to you to go spend a little time. Because here's the thing, the reality is once they get out into the field and they start, and even if they're a CSR, my time with them becomes pretty limited. And so this is a way for me to build a relationship with them, for Sean to build a relationship with them, and then that way we have a stronger bond on the very beginning. We've already invested all that time and energy getting them to this point. It's important that we like make that onboarding process effective.
So what you didn't hear in that was sit them down in front of a computer for the rest of the day.
Yes.
That's the biggest thing, the worst thing you can do. Don't sit them in front of a computer for the rest of the day. Next is to don't wing it, to have a structured questions and processes, right? Sit down and write your interview questions out, even from just a formal HR process. You want to ask the same set of questions to the same candidates to keep it fair. So it does need to be written down and in writing, and that way you can, have especially if you're doing like a panel interview. If you've got three innovative employees or safe haven employees who are interviewing a candidate, we need a structure to be able to collect our thoughts on that question over three different pieces of paper, right? And so having that pre-thought out prevents, feeling discombobulated, and the employee, the candidate, from feeling like these people don't have their life together. Why would I want to come work with them, right? And that's an important part of that process that we want to look for.
All right, soft skills. Don't ignore the soft skills. I think they are best summed up in Patrick Lencioni's book of The Ideal Team Player, where he talks about hungry, humble, and smart. And I will take, like, as we were talking about the don't limit yourself on number 5, don't limit yourself to experience. This one is the side of that that's like the most critical things that I want in a new hire are the soft skills. You can't teach soft skills. That's something that becomes hardwired in them over the 18 years of them slowly becoming an adult, and even from the time that they're probably about 25 or so. You don't want to hire somebody that wasn't hardwired to have those soft skills. When I refer to humble, hungry, and smart, I encourage you to pick up the book and read it. It's a very short, quick read, but it being humble basically is there's not an ego there that you having to deal with. Humble or hungry is about having a want to go out and work and work hard. And then smart is socially smart, like be able to read a room, be able to talk to a client and understand the empathy component, understand the compassion. A technician be able to understand what a client is saying with their eyes or their body language versus just what's verbally being said. So those are such important skills.
Okay, real quick, I started sharing so you guys could capture a quick screenshot of all of these. Now, am I sharing the big screen or the little presenter view?
I'm seeing the little
All
nine.
right, that's what I thought. How's
There
that?
it
Better?
is. Got it. Yep.
Okay. So y'all feel free to take a screenshot of our 10 do's. Just a quick recap: use technology, be involved, don't pass it off to other employees in your office. Consider working interviews where they ride along or sit or nest with other employees in your office during the interview process and pay them for their time for that. Do group interviews where you bring in a bunch of candidates all at one time. Have panel interviews where your employees, multiple employees of your company interview candidates. Focus on your culture and core values. Use that thread of reference check so the candidate will get you answered on the reference. Call the references and recap that so you get a more productive reference call. Be intentionally efficient, quick, and concise during the entire interviewing and hiring process. And don't forget to use your referrals and don't be cheap. For your don'ts, don't panic hire. Don't talk too much. Don't overthink the resume. Don't hire job hoppers. Don't limit yourself to people who only have pest control experience. Don't give verbal offers. Always give a formal offer in writing. Don't hire without an onboarding plan. Don't wing it during the hiring process. Have a structure and communicate the process of what it is. Next, we're going to do this. Blah 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 blah. Have that all laid out. Have your questions. Don't ignore the soft skills. And making sure that they're hungry, humble, and smart. And then lastly, don't tolerate those slow communication. Those customers who or those applicants who you may not hear from them. And if you don't hear from them, then there's your answer, right? As you go through that particular process.
Yeah, if they're not going to communicate well with you in the beginning, they're not probably going to communicate well with you as a team member. And one thing that I don't think we really touched on, Kevin, was when you got a good resume and you have a good potential candidate, text them. Do not
Yes,
sit
we
around
did
and just
not.
email them. Text them. Use that phone number. So many the generation you're probably trying to hire, they're not checking emails, but they are watching text. So move the process along quickly through a text system.
Yeah. Thanks. I mean, I'm sure all of you on this call have lived through that when communicating with appointments with customers. They won't answer the phone. You call them to schedule an appointment, but you send them a text message, they'll reply back. It's the same for candidates, right? And you go through that particular process. So absolutely. We want to both thank, or Michael and I want to both thank you for joining our webinar today on hiring. We should have probably put our contact information on here. It's just michael.bosco@McFarland Stanford, kevin.kime@McFarland Stanford. If either of you have questions, please feel free to reach out. We can gladly send over these or provide additional context for you. Also, if you guys would like to talk to us about our upcoming peer group discovery meeting where you can learn about our peer groups, our next discovery meeting is in January. You actually get to come to Dallas and experience Safe Haven Pest Control and kind of see what a peer group with McFarland is like, including the on-site there at Safe Haven. So we'd love to talk to you more about that or any of the one-off questions that y'all have with hiring. This is at every peer group that we go to, hiring is a topic that we hear consistently. So we know that this is something that everybody experiences, but it's probably the thing that we spend the least amount of time on as a company. We're really good at building SOPs from a technical perspective, and we have maybe even from a software and office perspective, but we probably ignore the SOPs for hiring and onboarding. And so our goal today was to hopefully give you guys a framework to build that bad boy out.
We did it.